Hi, I'm Daniel Loveland at Holly Hunt, Minneapolis, here at International Market Square. Welcome to Inside Minneapolis.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Inside Minneapolis. I'm Phill Lindsay. And on this edition, we're going to be taking a look at, well, part of the big picture of what's going on here in Minneapolis. We're going to be looking at some of the history, some of the geology. We're going to be talking about civics and citizenship, along with urban design and some planning. I'll be back with my first guest, David Wiggins, from the Minnesota Historical Society, right after we take a look at this montage of some early civic leaders. Stay tuned. Okay, and we're back, and we just saw some very interesting photographs. And David, we were talking as we were sitting here about there's sort of a pattern that you might notice about these images there. Who the heck were those guys as a lump? I mean, in a group, who were those guys?
Well, Minnesota was sometimes called the New England of the West, and the great appeal that this place had for those folks that had come from the colder parts of the United States was not only the idea that they could make some money here, they were looking to make something else here too. They were looking to make a new community here and to really take a lot of the values, a lot of the patterns of New England and bring it right here to the upper Mississippi and see what they could do with the water power of St. Anthony Falls.
Okay, well, that leads me to my next question. And since we're really talking about sort of the big picture here on this edition of Inside Minneapolis, why is there a city here? It may seem obvious to everybody. I mean, that's where you get your mail and, you can park your car. But why is there a city right here?
Well, I think you need look no further than the name of the city of Minneapolis. It means Waterfall City. And the water power of St. Anthony Falls was the motive force for putting a city right here on this part of the Mississippi River. St. Paul downstream was essentially the head of navigation. So without the water power here at Minneapolis, there would have been no real motivation to come upstream a little ways above the head of navigation. But that water power was recognized by all of these New Englanders as a terrific economic potential. Yeah. They knew you could make money off of that, and that's what they came here to do.
Now, is that because they've been making money similarly back home? Or?
Sure, all those little New England streams that were powering Mills and Lowell and all up and down in New England were pretty small compared to what you could do with the Mississippi here. And it wasn't just the water power itself, it was also all the other natural resources here. They had the great white pine forests to the north. They looked at the terrific amount of farmland stretching off in the prairie. They looked at the Mississippi River connection, and all of the geographical factors came together. These guys were good at geography. They understood that geography connects to making money, and that this was going to be a money-making place if they came into it and developed it the right way.
When you said something interesting too about the river as a source of collection, in terms of how people kind of come to this area and stay here.
That's right. Well, you look at what was going on in the country as it was expanding westward following the Mexican War and then the California Gold Rush. You had this great rush to the west, to the far west in California. But then you also had another rush coming up the Mississippi River. And I've always thought of those as like two axes in the country. One, this east-west axis is dispersing people, uprooting them and sending them flying off to what looks like a quick fortune. Then you have the other factor of people coming to the Mississippi, and it collects them almost like a watershed collects the water into the river. And you find people in Minneapolis staying here for many generations, not coming and leaving as soon as they make their fortune.
Which is true in your personal case, isn't it?
That's right. I've been here about 5 generations too,
in
in my different branches of the family.
Yeah.
And people come here and they put down good roots by the river, and they come here with a mindset of staying for the long term. They make the decisions they make with a long-term view of the world.
So when a lot of these folks came, they weren't necessarily thinking, let's head out there to what we now think of as the Midwest, make it rich, and then go back?
Well, they came for many different reasons,
Yeah.
of course, and you'll find the whole range of motivations
Okay.
there. There were a lot of get-rich folks coming here, too. Land speculation was one of the great motivations. But a lot of them were coming here with a different ideal than just making money. They were trying to create the kind of community they had as an ideal. They were also working on their own identity. I think that if you can summarize the three main motivations for coming to Minnesota, it boils down to health. We are a much healthier place than most places in the country.
Which remains true statistically
That's
to
right.
this day. That's right.
That's right. We were above the malaria zone, and many of the other frontier areas were suffering from all kinds of illness. So health was definitely one of the motivations. Wealth. This is a place where you can get rich. People were making money just on land speculation, but longer term they viewed this as having tremendous potential. And the other one is a little harder to get your hands around, but I think it's as important. It had to do with your sense of self. As people were part of this great nation and the sense of manifest destiny, they had to figure out how they fit into it. Was it just to go and make a quick buck, or was it to do something that was considered to be good and right and relating to their own sense of community values? They were often religious people. They represented a range of religious beliefs. Many of them were Congregationalists or Universalists that had interesting ideas about people's relationship to their community and their relationship to place. And what was happening here at Minnesota fed right into that. As they were making a new place, they could try to achieve their ideas.
It was almost like a workshop. I mean, it was uncharted in many ways, and they could come in and kind of the old classic story, let's do well by doing good.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Well, that's the old New England story. You know, the Puritans left to come to New England to set up a new city on the hill to try to do it right this time. And as they moved to the West, they carried a lot of those same ideals along with them, hoping to bring that as a successful model here. John North is one of my favorite characters. As he came to early St. Anthony, he was all full of this idealism. He was a Methodist minister who'd left the church because it wasn't taking a strong enough anti-slavery stance. And he was so full of moral righteousness, he would point out people's faults so they might correct them. Like
Just rather casually? I mean,
right, like, he might point out to a woman how she could improve the appearance of her overly long nose by a different bonnet design, like helpful advice like that. But
made a lot of friends, I suppose.
But even this morally virtuous community of St. Anthony was not quite pure enough for him, and he had to pull out and found Northfield as another start at that.
Yeah.
That's right.
Mr. North.
So he was just one of the examples of the many folks coming in with this sense of what the community should be. And they were crashing with the old guard that had been here for many years in the fur trade and had a little looser idea of how you should run things in the
Maybe
community.
a little rougher and readier in those days.
That's right, all the frontier
What time frame
values.
are we talking about here? When
Well, it was
the
largely
North-
the 1850s,
Yeah,
and that was
middle
when
of
the
that
big
century.
boom happened in the 1850s, and I think that's when the country was going through a lot of this moral questioning. The slavery issue was very much on the table, and a lot of this discussion about how virtuous we are in the North was around the moral degradation, as they termed it, of the South, as they weren't practicing these virtues of hard work, and they even thought that the climate had a lot to do with that. It was just making them lazy and making them drink.
Well, did this lay some justification for preparing for a civil war? Or?
I think that's all wrapped up in the thinking about the moral crusade that the Civil War became. Their idea of what the country should be was very much behind the preservation of the Union. The idea of the South being able to split off contradicted their sense of this country becoming a great nation together. But it was also tied up with the anti-slavery issue. And it wasn't just the New England whites coming in with this view. It was a very interesting dialogue, including a free black community in Minneapolis at that time and St. Anthony. And it included an interesting relationship to the Dakota and the Ojibwe who were here as well. It's hard to see that through all of the injustices that took place
really
following
can
the war.
stand out.
They really do stand out. But earlier there was a hope and a sense that you could do the right thing by all of the people in the country and achieve this morally correct place.
Well, in terms of the city of Minneapolis, this municipality that we know and adore these days, what were some of their big plans or hopes, maybe their aspirations for this as a city when these wise transferred transcendentalists showed up here? What did they hope might happen here?
Well, you can look at what they did. Among the very first things they did was to duplicate the institutions of New England as best they could. They set up Masonic lodges, they set up literary societies and sewing circles, and of course founded churches, and putting a lot of their own money and time into developing these congregations, which they viewed as really key to the moral health of the community too. But then they also set about trying to reform the old fur trade crowd. North was introducing temperance laws up there at the on the Maine model at the state legislature, and you can imagine how well that went down with the Voyageurs. But that sense of moral reform came in right in the earliest wave that you could do this at the state level. I think it's been an enduring tradition at the state that we have these high ideals for the city of Minneapolis and also for the state as a whole.
Absolutely. And they had ideas about how the city could actually be patterned and designed and things like this. I mean, our park system, I think, harks to that. We showed an image of Charles Loring, for instance.
That's right. That's right. Well, when I was talking about people's sense of self being part of this mix, you look at what's going on in New England, they're trying to figure out the relationship people should have to the natural world. That this is part of the experience of being an American. As you're moving west, you're encountering what look like the Serengeti with these vast herds of bison, with these amazing flocks of passenger pigeons coming over. And as you get into this kind of environment where the natural world really has to be acknowledged in some way, your relationship to it has to be acknowledged too. They were, on one hand, trying to be extremely rational and trying to impose this strong rationality with Greek revival houses and an ordered society on the chaos of nature. And on the other hand, they were being romantic and thoughtful in many ways about the spirits and the intelligence of the natural world. And that idea that there is an intelligence in the natural world that is not contradictory to rationality, but can be a part of a rational relationship to the world shows up in the writings of people like Thoreau and Emerson and the New England transcendentalists, who were really part of that culture as it was being transplanted to the West out here. And it fed back to the East too. You see this great fascination with the Native Americans and their relationship to the world being a romantic relationship in some ways, but in other ways they were looking at it for something more, for a pattern of a correct relationship they might achieve too. And they were bringing this, both directions. On one hand, they wanted these people to abandon their traditional way of life, get with the program and start farming like all of the people they know. Right. But on the other hand, they were writing great poetry about it and trying to figure out how this informs their own relationship to this marvelous place.
David Wiggins, as usual, a fount of interesting information and good analysis. Thank you very much. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Always fun.
Well, I'll be back in just a moment with Jennifer Bloom, talk about citizenship and related issues. But first, let's find out a little something about Franklin Steele and his relationship to Fort Snelling. Stay tuned. And we're back, and I have to say thanks to Sherry Nolan, because I always love when we find out something that I didn't know on this show, and I had no idea about Mr. Steele owning for a while Fort Snelling, so that was cool. My next guest is Jennifer Bloom, a woman with whom I've shared historical moments. Jennifer, it's nice to have you on the show.
Well, thanks.
Thanks. And Jennifer is the head of the Minnesota Center for Community Legal Education. And that's a mouthful. Would you just tell me and our viewers, what do you guys do?
Well, actually, we keep trying to change our name because it is such a mouthful.
I didn't know that. You're trying to change your name?
Yeah. Well, we've been trying to come up with a clever name, and we haven't
okay.
come up with one. We teach law and civics to kids
Yes.
and teachers
Yeah.
and adults.
Exactly. And you and I met something like 15 years ago around the whole celebration of the bicentennial of the U.S. Constitution. And I can understand why you were there. I'm not quite sure why I was there. But it was a fascinating time to celebrate 200 years of the Constitution. And that's the sort of thing that you get into the lives of these kids and school districts and the like?
Right, and I think the thing that the bicentennial of the Constitution brought to me was the focus that we had on our project we were working on the preamble,
Yeah.
and how it sets sort of a mission of the Constitution,
Right.
and it's a mission of how all of us are going to get along together and work together in this democracy. And for me, that's the guiding piece of what we do.
Yeah, and both literally and metaphorically, it is the Constitution. It's the touchstone that we go
Right,
to
right.
when we don't know what else to do, and we say, well, what is our agreement here? Who are we?
I like to think about the American dream 225 years ago.
Wow.
When people came to this country and said, they wanted a lot of freedoms and liberties, and they said, we're going to be self-governed. We're going to govern ourselves, and we're going to create a document that's going to guide us in this. And that's what the Constitution is.
That's well said. You've said that to some classes, I bet.
Oh, probably.
Now, when those folks came here with that idea, or they developed that idea, in the world that they knew, which I'm guessing was pretty much the Western world, had that ever been attempted before?
I think it had, unsuccessfully though.
Yeah? I mean, there were certain Greek city-states, I guess, that sort of engendered this notion of self-rule, but they were limited in who actually was enfranchised.
Right. And we were too.
Yeah, 225
Right,
years ago. And
right.
some might say even today, I
Even
suppose.
today. And
That's right.
it's a growth, and it's
Yeah.
a progress. And when people think about the Constitution as sort of a dead document, in my mind,
No.
it's truly an experiment. We aren't done yet.
Right.
And
And
it
never will be.
Never will be.
Yeah. In fact, there are big things happening as we sit and talk at the Supreme Court level that may redefine a lot of how we interact on the streets, as
That's
it were.
right. That's right. I think there are some folks who are billing this year's term of the U.S. Supreme Court as the biggest in 30 years.
No kidding.
And the one big decision that I think about is one concerning the Miranda warning.
Right.
And there's the chance now that might not be required anymore.
Yeah.
If this one opinion goes the way that.
Now, would it be that they never would have, if the decision goes that way, they would never have to do it, or would it be like on a probable cause, hot pursuit kind of a thing, where they can just
right
nab
now,
a suspect?
you have a constitutional right to be informed of your rights, or
Right.
to know to exercise your rights.
Yeah.
Miranda says in order to do that, you need to know what your rights are.
Yeah.
To know what your rights are, somebody's got to tell you.
Yeah.
That's the Miranda warning.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court's looking at the decision about, is the Miranda warning a constitutional right? Or does it just protect another constitutional right? If it just protects another constitutional right, we can take it away without being unconstitutional.
Fascinating.
There's a federal law that takes it away in all federal prosecutions. So,
Yeah, and they're
could be big.
Yeah. And I know they're doing a whole lot of other things. I mean, they've been making decisions about tobacco and FDA.
Yesterday.
Yeah, that just happened in March, I know. Yeah.
And prayer in schools.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of big events.
And these are some of the issues I know that you take to teachers as well as the kids
Right.
themselves. What format do you
Okay,
do that
here's
in?
what we do. We use the Constitution and the Bill of Rights as sort of the grounding document in all of our educational programs. So when I'm working with a group of people and I say the word civics, and they
Yeah.
groan
Yeah.
because what they remember out of civics is how a bill becomes a law and the flow
Yeah.
chart,
Yeah.
and it's very boring. We don't do that.
Yeah.
We talk about the issues around it. You write a bill because you have a concern and you have a public problem that needs to be solved. And in solving that problem, you have these constraints of the Constitution that tell you what you can and cannot do. We have a Minnesota Constitution that also has some constraints.
Yeah.
That's the way we approach civics education. We don't do how a bill becomes a law unless you want to pass a bill.
Yeah, and
then
then you
we'll
might need
say,
to know
then-
the formal
then-
steps.
Right.
Yeah. And among other places, you've worked in Minneapolis public schools.
Right now, I just this morning came
Yeah.
back from Anderson Open School, where I'm
Yeah.
working with the young people there to create their own sort of judicial system.
How are they doing? How do
well,
they take to that?
They love it.
Yeah.
And it is a student court, and it is actually part of the disciplinary structure. So kids can
These are
opt
real
in.
situations.
These are real cases.
Oh, my.
And if the student admits to the offense,
Yeah.
they can go to student court. And in student court, a jury of their peers decides what the penalty will be.
Oh my.
They look at the offense, they
Yeah.
look at the potential list of options for sentencing.
Yeah.
The whole goal is not punitive, but it's restorative. So
Okay.
what can we do to help our school community better,
Yeah.
to help this student re-engage, get excited about coming to school? The student has to serve on the jury.
All right. Give me an example of some of the, I don't think you call them punishments, but some of the situations where they have to make good. They have to restore.
Things like they may have to give a written or an oral apology to the school.
Oh, okay.
They may, if they were involved
Take
in
responsibility.
vandalism in the school, they got to clean it up.
Okay.
If they were disrespectful, they might have to write a paper on respect.
So it's an idea of kind of making things whole again.
Exactly.
Cleaning it
Yep.
up or fixing it
Right.
or engaging.
Right.
Let's step back a little bit. This is a show kind of about the big picture. And from your perspective, I know you do things statewide and you have events that you're part of nationally as well. How do you think we're doing as a civic polity? And I say that partly because I know that you also are aware of the last 225 years. Are we doing better? Are we holding our own? Or are things getting worse? Are we diverging in our sense of community, or are we sharing a sense of community?
I think we're going in two different directions.
Yeah.
I think that in terms of our knowledge and understanding and use of the institutions we've created as a sort of self-governing group, we don't understand them.
We being the general
General
public.
population.
Okay.
We don't know how, this goes to the unicameral discussion
that's true.
going
Big
on
debate
right
here in
now.
Minnesota.
We don't even understand what the legislature does well enough to hold them accountable. So the governor is saying, let's eliminate these complicating steps here so citizens can have access and can understand what's going on, hold them accountable. That's an example of us not
Okay.
understanding it.
Yeah. Okay. So that's one direction where we
That's
just
one
don't.
direction. We just don't understand it.
Yeah.
So what happens?
These are the structures of our. Okay.
What happens is we're creating a parallel system.
Yeah.
And the parallel system is good. It's community activism.
Okay.
Now, I think they have to work together.
Is there a disconnect at this point,
There's a
though?
disconnect right now,
Okay.
I think. We've got people who are saying that government is so broken, ignore them.
Yeah.
We'll take control in our neighborhood. We'll just solve our problems by ourselves. We don't need them. So in terms of public problem solving, when we have this Constitution that sets out our systems and we have
Right.
a way of solving our public problems that doesn't work, eventually we become alienated and create a new system, and that's
Sure.
what we're doing. And so we have community problem solving groups. We have neighborhood action groups.
Yeah, and some of that's to the
Some
good.
of it's great.
Yeah, some of it's very
But
effective.
if you don't know how a bill becomes a law, or
Yeah.
you don't understand how your systems
Yeah.
and your institutions work, eventually this effort's going to bump into a system.
Yeah, there'll be some conflict maybe
There'll
down
be
the road.
a city ordinance that says you can't do it.
Yeah, even though in that particular part of town, maybe people want to do it.
People want to do it, but they don't
Good
know
point.
how to go about
Yeah.
changing the law, changing the rule, accessing systems of government, departments, agencies.
When in
to
certain
make it
parts
happen.
of this country, folks are out, in the hinterland, forming militias. My sense is, though, here in Minnesota, there's this sense that if they get frustrated and alienated, they kind of keep coming back to that ideal, though, of figuring out some way to make it work together.
I think we have a real history and a commitment
Yeah.
to solving problems together.
Right. And in a way, that goes back to what David Wiggins was talking about, was this sort of set in place 100, 150 years ago, hereabouts, this notion of figuring out a way to do it right. There was a certain moralism and righteousness maybe that informed that, but it really traces right on down to the grassroots level here, is what you're saying. Who are some of the partners that maybe in either system are helping to make this work, or maybe who aren't currently involved that ought to be better helping?
We have a lot of partners, but I think one really strong one in Minneapolis is the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Okay, tell us
They're
more about
real
that.
eager. Well, they're a big partner in the student court program.
Yeah.
The lawyers there are real eager to go and work with young people. They say they'd rather see them at the end where they're maybe just at the edge of falling off
Yeah.
and not see them when they've committed a major offense and now it's a federal crime.
Okay.
So they're a big partner. We work with the Department of Children's Families and Learning on sort of conceptualizing
That's
civics.
at the state level.
That's at the state
Yep,
level.
yep.
The Hennepin County Attorney's Office, we work
Okay.
with them.
And obviously the school and the whole education
School.
system. I know that some of the things you do, you help develop mock trial programs. You have constitutional. What was the thing? I came in and sat in a couple months
We
ago.
the People.
We the People. And what does that mean to the kids that get involved? Do you see them?
We the People is a real rigorous program, as
Yeah.
you noticed. It's really
Yeah.
understanding the foundations of democracy and all the
Yeah.
fundamental principles.
There was a lot of reading involved here.
A lot of reading, a lot of
study.
tough stuff.
Yeah.
The kids who do that walk away with a huge commitment to democracy. And they really understand the tensions. I think if you don't understand the tensions and have a real commitment to it,
Yeah.
it's real easy to throw it out. For example, we've got crime. We have the sort of the urging and the commitment to have public safety. But we also have rights of the accused of the Bill of Rights. And they are always bumping into each other.
And again, will always.
And will always.
Yeah.
And when we don't understand the Bill of Rights, this sort of commitment to safety starts to erode the Bill of Rights. So,
In a word, are you feeling like it's going well? Are you optimistic about when your kids grow up and they're teaching classes and they're out on the streets?
I think we have a huge opportunity right now.
Yeah.
I think the profile of learning has all the teachers looking at what are we doing in civics. In the past, some civics classes have included, how to file a tax return,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Yeah.
Now we've got some guiding principles, and we've got teachers looking at that. It's a
Yeah.
huge opportunity to change the way we've been teaching it.
So let's take that opportunity.
Let's take the opportunity. I think when we look at what's happening internationally, emerging democracies,
Yeah.
they are really grabbing hold and learning
Workshops
the
in
stuff.
place.
So
Yeah,
we
okay.
need to, I think there's lots of opportunity.
Thanks, Jennifer. Nice to have you on the show.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Well, I'll be back in a moment with Bill Morrish. We're going to have a great discussion about urban design and some of the opportunities for what we can do with this place that we're in. But first, let's hear from our host here at the International Market Square, Leah Rolley.
Hello, my name is Leah Rolley, and I'm the marketing manager here at International Market Square. This year, we're celebrating our 15th anniversary as the Design Center and Home Furnishings Mart. The building is home to over 100 Design Center showrooms and designer offices. Prior to it being the Design Center, it was the famous Munsingware factory. If you're planning to build or remodel, plan to attend the upcoming Twin Cities Home Furnishings and Design Show at the end of April. The weekend is April 28th through the 30th. The showrooms will be open, seminars will be offered, and it'll be an opportunity to fill your mind with creative ideas for your home.
The edge of Minneapolis and how that interacts.
Just a second. And we're back. I want to thank the folks here at International Market Square for hosting us here. It's nice to be here. Thank you, Leah. You are watching Inside Minneapolis. I'm Phill Lindsay, and sitting with me is Bill Morrish, who heads up the Design Center for American Urban Landscape. Thanks for being here.
It's good to be here.
Well, you and your resources have been part of this show since we started about a year ago. We've had a couple of your colleagues on talking about different parts of some projects going on here in Minneapolis. But for the benefit of those folks who aren't familiar with your Design Center, could you give us a synopsis of what you folks do?
Sure. It's a long title, but we're the Design Center for American Urban Landscape. We're an applied research center on urban design and city planning in the College of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at the University of Minnesota. And we work, our primary students are the civic leaders and community people of the region.
Yeah.
And we work on the issues of place and the quality of life with them, and hopefully create a place where people can come together that's somewhat neutral and politically neutral and
very important
and
point.
yes, very important point, and place rich,
Yeah.
where we can help people look at options
Yeah.
rather than final solutions. What options are available given the issues that we have today?
Well said. And I have to say that as I've gotten to know you a little bit over the years, and again, some of your colleagues and some of your students, one word I would use to describe, I know this about you and the people you've worked with, passion. You care about what you're involved in, and that's remarkable to experience.
Passion and humor, actually,
Oh,
I
do we
think
have
are
some
the
of
two
that
things
too?
that are important. I mean, we are theoretical in some regards, academic, as people like to say,
Yeah.
being able to bring in issues that people don't have time to look at.
Yeah.
But we deal with real issues. I mean, the frontline
absolutely.
questions and
Yeah.
questions of congestion, questions of affordable housing, and you need a passion to be able to push through because they're difficult issues that don't have simple answers.
And I bet you don't encounter too many people who don't have an idea.
Oh, there's plenty
Or
of
an opinion,
ideas,
you
and
know.
so the humor work
Yeah.
in bringing all those
That keeps you
different
moving.
opinions together,
Yeah.
and finding the common ground. That's what we try to do: is find a
That
common
would be
ground
key.
between differences, so that we can then build on the differences, so we don't just
Yeah.
go to battle on each other.
Well, I assume you had something to do with the naming of your center. I'm not sure if that's true.
That's true.
But in that case, I want to ask you this question. Design Center for American Urban Landscape. And there's a particularness to that title. When you think in your profession, you've had an extensive view, East Coast, West Coast, American Southwest, I know. When you think of the American urban landscape in very, very broad terms, what do you think of? What makes this a landscape to you?
First of all, we're the only center in the United States that actually takes the name that we first focus on the American city and then branch out into the world. And there was a lot of concern that, gee, if we just looked at the American city, maybe we wouldn't have enough to do. That's kind of a funny concept. But, but how do you work globally, actually, if you say American? And we say that the American city is a very particular kind of city that had unique origins. It has extensions to other prototypes, but is very unique, and it is one that many global communities are adopting. So trying to understand what is unique about American cities, and they're very complicated and very different, is a critical question to understand who we are, how we operate, and what traditions we have we want to carry forward, and what new things we bring on. There's always been a struggle between, are we cities of the past or cities of the future? And that is very American, that we don't really reconcile our love for both, and that we bring those two together.
Well, that's an interesting point, because in the era of the modern, of course, we were a-borning. Whereas in European countries, those notions came up, but they turned around and there was a city here that might have been 600-700 years old already.
Historically, a lot of writers like to say that Europe might have invented the Enlightenment, but America actually got to build it.
Implement it, as it were.
Actually implement it, build it, and live in it, which is probably why the experiment is still going on, that the program is still being written. And you're right, it's actually the first country to build a complete urban landscape built on the concept of individual freedom and democracy. And yes, we've had a lot of problems of who lived here before and so forth, but it is, as best as it is, the only model that exists.
And in that grand experiment, then, people decide how they want their space to look, to feel, how they can program it, what they can do with it.
Right.
As you narrow down your focus from the American urban landscape into, and I might slow down here and actually just say sort of the region, the upper Midwest, Minnesota, is there anything particular here? I would guess weather and climate, but geology has to play to some extent.
Well, actually, weather, climate, geology are big factors in the formation of any city. Being at the headwaters of the Mississippi River is a very important symbolic thing in the global economy. In fact, if you travel internationally, if you say you're on the Mississippi River, people really think that's quite exciting, like you live on the Nile or the Ganges or the Amazon. I don't know if it's quite as exotic, but it is definitely interesting. But its position here, I think the Twin Cities, especially this area in the Midwest and Chicago, has a long history of developing very unique urban models. The Twin Cities is, of course, famously known for its park system, but its park system is a tool of city building. Its library, its park department, and so forth, being adjuncts to the central part of the city, and very much a building block between the center of the city and neighborhood, and very much a good example of how the individual and the collective are linked, not just by nature, but the idea of recreation, connection, communication,
learning,
through
all
systems.
Of that,
And we physically make it by making pathways and connections rather than just talk about it.
Fascinating. We talk a lot, both on this show, and I think we're justly proud of our park system here, Loring and Worth, and the vision that they had, and to a large extent, I think, successfully imposed. But you mentioned the libraries, and people maybe forget that people like Gratcha Countryman and the folks that were the architects of our library system consciously wanted to get out there as the city grew and get those branches out there to do the kind of things you're talking about.
Actually, the American Library and its strategic role in city building is one, again, a very unique phenomenon among any city around the world. You usually have like national libraries. But the notion of having the best and the brightest information, even down to the notion of computer connections, and even we have coffee shops in them now, is that it's a major, not only a neighborhood thing, but it's our connection between the neighborhood and the large metropolis. And those things that we did in the past, and some of those things we have today, we need to remember. We get too preoccupied with a single project and forget about those critical elements of building, how a road is built to not only move traffic, but connect people, how open space is built not only just for nature, but how it connects people. And like libraries and commercial zones, not only how they deliver that certain product, but again, how it connects people. And we've tended to move away from that as we've looked at well, we've got to have a big mega mall, or we've got to have a blocky, or we've got to have a baseball stadium. Yeah, those pieces are in there. But the things that are important are those connections, and we really have to build on them. That's unique about the Twin Cities.
Very interesting. And as you say that, maybe it's because of what I try and pay attention to, but I do sense that there's been an effort to do the latter. What do you think is the impulse that seems to be almost generic to build those mega malls and those sort of, I call it drive-by architecture, things that you can see outside any city? Is that just all about economy and money and the market?
Well, there's always been monument builders in cities, and there's always a group that deals with civic boosterism in a way, and building those objects are important. But at the same time, we need to build the connective fabric. I mean, at the other end, we can't just build housing. We have to build neighborhoods. And again, as I think you've seen in the Holman project, the north-south connection and linking it down into the Bassett Creek and Loring Park, which was it's a historic relationship ecologically anyway. I mean, it was a giant lake at one time. Is as important as the mix of housing. Because without it, we're still behind something. We're still behind the freeway. We're still behind the garbage plant and so forth. So those connections are the big products of the future. And I think what's unique about the Twin Cities, and especially Minneapolis, is that we're one of the rare American cities where the fabric of the center to the outer edge of our neighborhoods continuous. We have neighborhoods, vital, rich, good neighborhoods. They may have lots of issues in them that still exist. And we've got to build that fabric and not cut it off.
Yeah. There are a lot of issues, and as we're sitting here, the state legislature is meeting, and there are a lot of issues now that seem to sort of tip at the suburban point. Transportation issues, voting patterns along a lot of different cases. Where do you, as an urban designer and someone that looks in the large picture, where do you see the tipping happen? The two inner cities, in my mind, seem to have a lot in common. I mean, there's a political and a historical difference between Minneapolis and St. Paul, but we seem to have a lot in common. Then the inner ring suburbs seem to be kind of joining a lot of those issues. Where does it change? Where do the issues significantly change? I'm kind of looking inside out. I guess I'm asking for an outside in view here.
I think one thing is that whole hierarchy is fundamentally changing. That the center versus the edge, the city versus the suburb. First of all, and we've been doing an awful lot of work with metropolitan suburban communities, Roseville, I was in Ramsey the other day. What we're seeing is really there's a mosaic, not a ring, that you can't say the suburb is one kind of mentality, and that not everything that is good is in the city and not everything is bad is in the city. It really is. We have a diverse economy. We have a diverse set of places to live. And as a large metropolitan area, to really sort of make that distinction between where the city ends and the suburb begins in the way that politics or the quality of place begins is almost impossible. And which I think is a positive element, because then we understand we're all in the same boat. That transportation, affordable housing, childcare, environment, the quality of life issue is all over every community. How we deal with it individually and as a region is very important. So one mode of transportation, whether it's the car or LRT, isn't going to solve it. It's going to be the interaction of the modes. We're going to need all the modes of transportation: bus, light rail, more effective auto transportation. In other words, roads that organized, better connections inside, bicycle. Good cities that are going to compete regionally and globally are investing heavily in the connective infrastructure between home and work and within the neighborhood. And it can't be just one versus another. And we have to invest all of it. If everybody says, gee, $500 million sounds a lot for light rail. All of what we're talking about is billions and billions of dollars. It's how we incrementally put the things that we're doing together. That's how we get the billions.
Mosaic you're talking
exactly,
about.
and it's all within that funding. And I have to say, it's very difficult politically, because it's much more of a bipartisan issue than it is, the central city's Democratic and the suburban's Republican. That's not true. I work with bipartisan leadership, and they all ask the question, how do we leverage the quality of life? And that's going to require government and the private sector and neighborhoods working very creatively about reinforcing linkages first.
And maybe a little bit of sense of humor.
A lot of humor. Yes, I know it's tough in Minnesota to have that sense of humor, but you have to, yes.
Bill, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your overview.
Okay,
That's
sure.
great. Well, I'll be back with another gentleman who's got a bit of an overview, Randall Bradley. He'll be on right after we take a look here at an image schematic from the old 1917 Minneapolis plan. Stay tuned.
It's okay.
Well, and we are back, and actually that image is one that I find very interesting, so I want to thank the folks over at the library, the Municipal Information Library, and I think the Public Library, Special Collections, helped dig that up, and our crew went out and got an image of that. I'm sitting with a gentleman I've known for a few years, Randall Bradley. He's an architect. He's also the Vice President of the Minneapolis Planning Commission. Thanks, and glad you're here.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I was looking forward to having you on because I know you're not shy about your opinions.
Moi?
Yeah, that's right. Let's start a little bit about what you do. You are an architect. What kind of projects do you
I'm an
work
architect in private practice, and I have a small firm that's going to be growing. And the bulk of my work is commercial and in institutional projects.
Okay.
I'm currently doing a feasibility study for Sumner Library for them to remodel and expand that facility.
That's a nice library.
It's a wonderful library. It's one of 3 Carnegie libraries in the city of Minneapolis. It's a really special library. We just had a big neighborhood meeting about a week ago, and the neighborhood came out very strong, and they really feel extremely connected to that facility.
We did one of our first shows in the Sumner Library.
Well, good for you.
That's a nice
Good
space,
for
and
you.
we talked with people about our age that said, I grew up here, this is where I came in and learned to read.
And that tradition is still ongoing, and these people that showed up want that tradition to continue for their children.
Yeah.
So we have to do a very good job to keep that thing at its place in the neighborhood, just to make it a very strong neighborhood institution.
Yeah.
And that's our focus, to do that.
And now in terms of the architecture, maintain sort of the feeling of that because it's a lovely, charming building.
Well, the first part is the feasibility study to figure out how many square feet they need to
how
build.
you program it.
Program it.
Yeah.
Once that happens, whatever the design approach, the historical features of that building are going to have to remain. It's just too important to too many people.
Yeah.
And so we'll attend to those issues as they evolve out of our efforts.
Good for you.
Right now.
I'm glad you're involved in that.
I'm
That's
real
great.
excited about this project. Real excited about it. So.
Well, you're also involved in the community in many ways, and I don't know how many of these we'll talk about.
Okay.
I do want to talk about the Planning Commission because that has a citywide purview.
Sure.
I also know you're involved with the Holman effort,
Right.
particularly, and we were talking about Bassett Creek. Well, maybe just briefly for the sake, because people are going to be interested. What are you doing with that?
Well, I'll give you a quick history here. I kind of got into what I refer to as my civic phase, kind of sideways through block club activity in my neighborhood.
Okay.
There were some difficult properties, and neighbors were getting together to kind of respond to those issues. And so that led to me being basically collared by one of my neighbors who forced me to join him in writing the NRP plan for Near North and Willard Hay.
Oh, okay.
So I'm still on one of those committees, which is our NRP Housing Committee. Well, that led to a bigger vision, because NRP is a citywide, so I was asked to apply to and subsequently got appointed to the City Planning Commission. Now, you have to remember, I was okay just drawing lines, okay? So that has evolved to where, so from the Planning Commission, I sit on the Holman Committee as a planning commissioner.
Okay, so you're delegated, as it were, by the commission to sit in on that.
Right.
Okay.
So that really is goes back to what you just said, a citywide view, because sitting on the Planning Commission, we get to see projects from all over the city.
Oh, yeah.
And the City Planning Commission really wants to be the think tank for the City Council.
Yes, sir.
In terms of an analytical and planning approach, not a political approach to issues.
Right.
So we like to give them good planning information that they can take and do what they need to do as a city council in order to make political and financial decisions. And so I think this city, in terms of particularly the Holman, let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah.
The Minneapolis Public Housing Agency, the Minneapolis Community Development Agency, the Planning Commission, and the City Council, 4 agencies that historically don't have, always have a team effort on projects, have really forged to move that project ahead.
Yeah.
I was in City Hall last night at the committee of the whole meeting, the City Council, and I was excited. They're excited. Everybody's excited that we have got this thing where it is, and we have a couple more steps to go through to start the ball rolling.
What you're saying is at this time, anyhow, they're all singing off the same song sheet?
Everybody. It's a choir.
Wow.
It's
Someone should take a
wonderful.
photo. That's
Thank
pretty
you.
good.
You should.
That's
Okay.
pretty good.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
exciting.
Well, sketch out, if you would. Some folks know, because we did a piece on Holman when we were at the Sumner Library. But for those who aren't familiar with that project, this is big. I mean, we're talking...
73-acre project.
Yeah.
The public housing has been torn down because it was substandard. Poor soils, the houses were actually sinking. Prior to Holman even getting started, as an architect, I was looking at doing a project up there. I walked up to a unit outside, the brick that had settled. You could put your hand between the bricks.
Oh, that's bad.
Yeah, so structurally it's dangerous because the
Yeah.
building could fall and kill people.
Yeah. It's
So-
not comfortable. I mean, you got wind coming in here. I mean, there's... Yeah.
and animals and critters
Critters,
and all
yeah,
kinds of things.
yeah.
So subsequent to that, there's been a lot of work done in terms of soils, what's going to take to remediate the soils. We're talking about putting in new roads, reconnecting that part of town back to the grid.
Yeah, some nice parkway efforts in there.
It's going to be green space. We're going to daylight Bassett's Creek.
Yeah, and what you mean by that is
You're
actually...
going to be able to look at it like you look at Minnehaha.
Yeah, get it up from underground.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, that leads to stirrings of the Grand Rounds.
Oh, yeah.
So you have this thing in Minneapolis called the Grand Rounds that
Yeah.
everybody wants to see happen. And the north side of town and northeast have been disconnected from those possibilities. And so these are small incremental steps to start to pull the city back together.
See, and this is where we start talking big picture.
Big
'cause this
picture.
isn't small potatoes here.
No, and
Yeah.
not only that, North Minneapolis and the Upper River, a portion of it, have been designated an enterprise zone, which means there's some federal dollars that will come in here if we get some good proposals put together. Along with that, there's an Upper River master vision,
Yeah.
which is just underway. In fact, we just closed a public hearing on it. Staff has to do a lot more work. That is a project that's going to last anywhere from 20 to 50 years, 60 years.
Yeah.
I mean, Minneapolis is in a point where we're getting ready to have a rebirth.
Yeah.
This is our own renaissance that we have generated ourselves.
Yeah.
This is not coming from anywhere outside. This is these are Minneapolitans who are saying we need to make the place we live better.
Is some of this bubbling up from this grassroots effort? I mean, you talked about block clubs and folks getting involved in the community level, and earlier in our show we had Jennifer Bloom talking about how people do get together, both kind of at the top level looking down from this master plan, but also people in the neighborhoods and the NRP committees. Is that where some of these ideas are percolating up from?
Absolutely. As a city planning commissioner, I see projects from all over the city. And they're just everything from coffee shops to whole half-block new developments. Well, who's doing this? And you look around and there's neighbors. There aren't outside whiz kids coming in and dazzling people to get them to follow them in a kind of a Pied Piper way. The citizenry has actually gotten sophisticated enough to say, we want this change for our community.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing it in North Minneapolis, I'm seeing it in the Northeast. In Northeast, there's a whole artist community coming forward.
That's really growing.
We've created an artist overlay district in the new zoning code so that they can actually live in industrial areas because they need big spaces to
Now,
do
is that
art.
something the Planning Commission got involved in? Is that overlay? I mean, the technical details
Well, we
of that?
rewrote the zoning code, and there's a parking overlay district, there's a pedestrian overlay district, there's an artist overlay district.
Yeah.
I mean, the zoning code was 39 years old, it was written in 1963.
Think about that. That's 2 generations
Thank
we're
you.
talking about
So
here.
we have a brand new zoning code that allows the city to have more flexibility to allow artists not to have to be bootleggers,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah.
So there are lots of initiatives, and they're coming both from the top down, and there's a lot more coming from the bottom up, which makes a significant difference, I think,
Yeah.
in what's going to happen in this city
Sounds
in the
like you're
future.
pretty excited, though, about this next 20, 30 years.
I mean, anybody, you'd have to be excited. I mean, how many cities get this opportunity?
Yeah.
And how many cities get this opportunity when the citizens are behind it?
Yeah.
When the citizens are pushing this. I'm from a big city. I'm from Chicago. This doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Because of the top down. At least it did historically when I grew up there. So this is radically different from a future development, future planning, from an urban planning point of view. And I think it's to Minneapolis's credit that at least on particularly this one project, we've got 4 agencies working together.
On the Holman, for
On
instance.
the Holman project.
Yeah.
But clearly, we're now developing a relationship and a bond that we can use on other projects in the city.
So you're modeling future collaboration.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you a question. This may sound a little off the wall, but when you came here, and I know you had a few stops between Chicago and Minneapolis.
Right, I did.
When did you actually settle in Minneapolis?
I moved to Minneapolis November 3rd, 1975. I think it was 81 degrees out.
I was going to say just in time for winter.
Right.
If you could close your eyes right now and think back to your impression of Minneapolis then, what was your subjective impression of the city? And on any basis. Provincial. Yeah.
Fauché Tower, IDS, and the First Bank Building. Okay. Duh! Where's downtown?
Yeah.
Okay? You look at downtown now, we got world-class buildings here.
Yeah.
There were something like 3 restaurants. I moved here from Boston, Massachusetts.
Yeah, directly from Boston.
Right, where I would ask my wife after work, well, what kind of food do you want tonight? Northern Italian, Southern Italian, and then after we, Chinese or Mandarin or Spanish, not Mexican.
Spanish.
Yeah, or even
Portuguese maybe.
Portuguese or French. I mean, so once we decided what we wanted, then we said, okay, which of the 3 restaurants do? Choices.
Yeah.
Well, we got here, there were like 3 restaurants, period, and they all had steak.
Well, there would be the Jolly Troll.
Okay.
Yeah, I know what you're talking
about. So we clearly proceeded to crest of that wave. Now we have lots more choices here, lots more opportunities for diverse kinds of experiences, a lot more diverse kinds of people are here now. Yeah. So Minneapolis is growing, got some growing pains. This is what happens.
But you feel like the capacity has been built, if not to its final stage, but the capacity of people both in the neighborhoods and in the municipal sector to work together and deal with some of these issues and problems?
I think Minneapolis is learning how to do it up to and including the point of exceeding other cities in their ability to do it.
I was just going to ask that. If you were to compare?
I know there have been other cases of consent decrees in other cities, and almost to a city, with the exception of Minneapolis, they have rejected the notion of dispersing poverty throughout their communities.
Okay.
In Minneapolis, we have succeeded in breaking up that pocket of poverty. Yeah. We are replacing some units back on the site, in fact 25% of the units, but we're also doing scattered site around the city, and we've gotten the suburbs to buy in with the help of the Metro Council. This is significant because other communities have just slammed the door on this concept. So they're not being diverse. They're not looking towards the future. This is about the future, not about bringing the past and say, let's repeat it.
Yeah.
So Minneapolis is on the crest of a wave that other communities, other cities are not moving towards.
That's a hopeful thing you just said.
That's a significant thing.
Yeah.
And that makes me real excited about this city. And I think it makes the people in the city council and some of the people in the private sector real excited about this city, because we are moving to a cutting edge where we were when the Met Council first got established.
Yeah.
That was significant.
That's good.
So I think we're moving back to some of those places that we occupied about 25, 30 years ago in this town.
Sounds good. Randall Bradley, thank you for being here.
I'll come back anytime you want.
Great. Keep up the good work.
I will.
Appreciate that.
Bye-bye.
Well, I'll be back to wrap up the show in just a moment, but first we're going to take a look at our what the heck wrong answers.
Oh, that's down St. Anthony Falls, right?
Oh, I don't know. Oh my gosh, no, I have no idea what it is. Am I supposed to know what it is?
1878, something to do with St. Anthony Falls, right? But I don't know what.
Looks like some kind of state seal.
Do you know, like, any idea?
I have no idea what it is.
Maybe like some kind of state album.
Okay, any idea, like,
kind of looks like something maybe in like Minneapolis or San Francisco, I don't know.
It looks like where geographically I think it is, or a dam.
It looks like an emblem. Possibly. It's in French. I have no idea.
It looks like some version of the state seal from long ago.
Yeah, well, we got this is like City of Minneapolis downtown, and we got the water wheel. We got Tom Griffin. It's a water thing. It's water. It's power, electric power. It's a hydroelectric dam.
Yeah, I would say the same, and I'd say it's commemorating the first waterfall on the Mississippi. How about that?
I don't know. Look like some kind of plans. Power plants.
Now let's go get the right answer to our what the heck question.
Hello, my name is Steve Ristuben. I'm the Assistant City Clerk of Minneapolis. And we are in the Minneapolis City Council chambers. And over my left shoulder is the Minneapolis City Seal, which was adopted by the City Council in 1878. And depicted on the City Seal is St. Anthony Falls in the foreground with a old suspension bridge in the background, the old Hennepin Avenue Bridge. And we have 6 items in the foreground. We have a barrel of flour, a wheel gear, a shock of wheat, a plowshare, a circular saw, and a stack of lumber. We use the City Seal every day in the City Clerk's office for all official documents. We put the City Seal over the Mayor and City Clerk's signature using this device.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this edition of Inside Minneapolis, and of course tune in next month when we take another look a little bit behind the scenes, maybe covering an important topic of things going on here in Minneapolis. By the way, for those of you who remember last month's show about entrepreneurialism and small business opportunities, I wanted to point out that one of our guests, Eric Nathanson, was recently honored. The Small Business Administration named Eric Nathanson the National Financial Advocate of the Year. That's a national award, and next month he'll be flying out to Washington, D.C., presumably for a Rose Garden ceremony to pick up his award. So congratulations to Eric. He, by the way, was very instrumental in putting that show together with us last month. Now, if you found anything on this edition of the show that you want to find out a little bit more about, you can call our hotline. That's 673-2234, and along in our credits we have our website, so you can call that up if you have that facility. Now, I always like to mention that alongside our catalog of useful resources that runs near the end of the show, we have an interesting photograph. This time it's of Pierre Bottineau, who was instrumental in some of the early happenings here in Minneapolis, and there's a little factoid under his name, so pay attention to that. And along the credits, of course, is a close-up image of the Great Seal of the City of Minneapolis. We'll see you next time. I'm Phill Lindsay for Inside Minneapolis.